Choose a Gentle Winding Path, an essay on ethical choice, Part 4, by Marty Price. Copyright 2022 Marty G. Price. This is chapters 8 and 9. Chapter 8, Ecology and Our Ecological Imbalance. In terms of our general effects on other species, the record is consistently negative. We're damaging to the planet. Humanity has taken on the characteristics of a locust species. That much is biology. There are insects that will madly devour a tree, then the population will starve, will fall to a few survivors, or even none, for a local population can die out. Likewise, a spreading species, like a notorious plague of locusts, will eat its food supply and succumb. The plague of locusts that, according to accounts, tormented the Mormons shortly after their arrival in Salt Lake City is of a species that no longer exists. They succeeded in eating their food supply and in attracting predators so thoroughly that their particular brand of grasshopper, the creatures they were before their reproductive frenzy, can no longer be found on the planet. Humanity's history is much like the growing half of such a cycle. From a slow-spreading species to a persistently growing species to one which, in the past several hundred years, has conquered the globe. That is humanity's history. Biology, taken alone, suggests that humanity will either kill itself out or, in the fashion of giant tortoises on an island or two, create a near stasis of misery, an excessive population, and grubbing in self-created poverty like those tortoises browsing on the meager available vegetation. While I earlier talked about our foolishness in terms of waste of resources and about our failure to accord respect and value to other species, as well as the consumerist frenzy of our commitment to mammon, I did not fully gather the three together to term us a blanket threat to the planet. By multiple measures, we are exactly that. Our locus status, a status we have the intellect, but perhaps not the deeper abilities, to control. Our capacity to severely damage or possibly destroy the planet's ability to support life through the spread of lethal radiation, nuclear war. And third, our callous destruction of other species and damage to this planet's general fertility. We once, in the pre-World War II years, approached the first of those the post-World War II years, approached the first of those problems with optimism. Our assaults on the diseases that made life, for so many, brutish and short, were accompanied by the discovery of means to control fertility that could lead to populations that were stable as well as healthy. People could sing small family, happy family mantras. It did not work out. China, following one of Mao's insane pronouncements, went on a childbearing frenzy that took its population over 2 billion, then stopped with a brutal one-child policy. India's vigorous small family policy, coupled with cultural notions of male superiority, created a market for sex-selective abortions and created a population that was dangerously male, brimming with the competitive sex-seeking pressures of hormone-charged young men. Rural families about the globe refused to get the message, with couples seeking security in their old age as they always had, by having enough children to be certain some would survive to care for them. Religious fanatics encouraged their followers to breed so that adherents to their faith might win the competition to dominate the planet. Ignorance, foolishness, prejudice, and unenlightened self-interest all worked to undermine the magical dreams of a time from a Malthusian terror, of a time free from Malthusian terror. Today, in the year 2022, a range of groups scream genocide, replacement theory, or some equivalently hysterical wail when confronted with suggestions for reproductive sanity or suggestions regarding our obligations to refugees. Refugee problems would be reduced if our habit of waging wars were controlled. The pressure to have more children might be reduced if more stable foundations for personal security could be spread. As the pressures triggered by cultural, ethnic, and racial competition, is there an answer other than having people somehow recognize that they are not the chosen ones? Ethics are universal. I am not a chosen one. My obligations extend to all of humanity. I am part of this earth. Unless we recognize our common humanity, all will perish. Unless we learn the concept all, we can expect to fall together into a quagmire of increasingly short and brutish lives. Since some people established a metaphoric clock for human survival some years after World War II, we have fluctuated some few minutes before midnight, before the presumed end of humanity and the certain end of civilization. In 1945, several men flying 2 bombers, some days apart, planted the seeds of world destruction. They did not create the seeds. They merely ferried them to their first destinations. It was a bombing, merely a bombing. The hideous inhumanity of war had revealed itself over and over for centuries. It was the habit of conquerors of cities, in what we term ancient times, to murder all the able-bodied males, first rape and then take captive all the females, and either murder or take into captivity all the remaining males, elderly or children. The city, for its offense of existing, would be burned to the ground. Medieval warfare included long sieges, in which the inhabitants of a city would be starved into opening their gates, then subjected to fates generally similar to those victims of ancient warfare. Modern war included cannons lobbing shot, then Gatling guns, and sometimes, only sometimes, imitations of the old burnings, as General Sherman ordered the burning of Atlanta in the American Civil War. Bombings, behavior which directly targeted chosen civilian populations, were a product of the 20th century, a product of a world which included great balloons, airplanes, and bombs that flew as crude and primitive drones instead of merely projectiles. In World War II, there were rockets aimed into England by the Germans. There was the English firebombing of the civilian city of Dresden. Bombs rained on military targets, bombs aimed so indistinctively that one intended for a factory could land on an apartment house, slaughtering half a dozen families. The launching of the atomic bomb was different. It relied on a nuclear reaction, the explosive sudden decay of a quantity of uranium. A single bomb might level a small city, like Hiroshima or Nagasaki. It would kill indiscriminately, kill by its initial force, by its debris and dust cloud, and, over time, by the poisonous effects of its radioactive components and their destabilizing of the various atoms with which they interacted. Its successor, the fusion hydrogen bomb, imitated the intense reactions of the sun. The hydrogen bomb carried the concentrated power to destroy the planet. The atomic bomb could be designed to carry or create fallout, even beyond that found in the initial explosions. Dirty bombs could be designed, so easily designed, to poison the planet for tens or hundreds of years. Was that first deployment ethical? Of course not. Werner Heisenberg, in charge of designing the atomic bomb for Hitler, likely deliberately sabotaged the project. I suspect he understood what such a weapon could do, and had the moral strength to, silently and carefully, render the German bomb unbuilt. But it ended the war. It saved so many lives, has been said regarding the 2 atomic bombings of Japan. An old Puritan, Samuel Sewall, writing America's first anti-slavery pamphlet back in the 17th century, said words to the effect of, "Good cannot come out of evil. One cannot do evil merely because one's ends are good." He anticipated Immanuel Kant by quite a number of years in that statement. He was right, and nothing demonstrates him right more than the history of major confrontation in the years since that first pair of bombs were dropped. The concept of karma is demonstrated by the subsequent history of the bomb. In one sense, karma is consequence, pure applied consequence. The atomic bombing created possibilities, and possibilities realized our consequences. That is karma. We live in the shadow of Hiroshima's and Nagasaki's mushroom clouds. In the years since that bombing, land has been poisoned by nations testing their nuclear devices. Airborne radiation was produced in other tests. Vast resources were wasted assembling nuclear fleets through a policy of mutually assured destruction, the creation of a destructive capacity so large as to guarantee the obliteration of both the aggressor and the respondent in any nuclear war. Vast expanses of ground were polluted by the mines needed to secure the uranium for weapons. On at least one occasion, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the bombs, the whole mad accumulation of American and Soviet nuclear bombs were almost launched. A full-scale nuclear war would destroy the planet. We know that even as we cannot estimate the details, know not what, if any, life would remain. The existence of nuclear arsenals on the planet is ethically appalling, hideous, reflective of a suggestion that our species not only lacks ethics, it is mad. Chapter 9. Animals, Plants, Genetics, and such things. We have, I fear, yet a third way to denigrate the quality of life on the planet, not through untenable instincts to breed or the madness that leads us to destroy, but in our callous indifference to the planet itself. We, humanity, are the documented source of the present great extinction. It is easy to condemn sport hunting of rare animals. I find it particularly easy because I do not understand the supposed pleasure in it. I would far rather know that a creature, particularly one that would not make its way to my dinner table, were alive and enjoying its life than laying dead at my feet. Pleasure of the hunt, some say? I have experienced the pleasure of the hunt. I have a wonderful little camera, an entry-level DSL, and have managed to catch sight of humpback whales, what I think was an elk, a variety of small creatures, many birds, alligators who were doing their best to pretend to be invisible, stunning turtles, and a great leatherback sea turtle laying its eggs. I shot every one of them, and have good pictures, a few good pictures as a result. I managed one or two of these expeditions under the care of a tour guide, but most were on my own and wandering. I feel a deep connection for everyone who stalks their game with a camera. Likewise for those who record diary entries on the behavior of wondrous beasts. The earth overflows with amazing beasts, real creatures that are honestly more intriguing than the fictional creations of J.K. Rowling, Dr. Seuss, or even the ancient creators of centaurs, griffins, and dragons with their breaths of flame. As for those gun-bearing folk who stalk rare African animals under the shepherding of a contingent of paid guides and beaters, and do so with the intent to shoot and kill, They strike me as cowards. As to the particularly nasty people who hunt wolves from helicopters, they are a sort I cannot help but despise. I do not condemn hunting of common species, such as deer in season. Other such expeditions, within the range of ecologically sound practice, are really not quite my business to oppose, though I will admit being ethically disturbed by any hunting whose aim is not purely related to the dinner table. All creatures have their lives, their joys, their place on this earth. Yet that whole question pales in comparison with the animal species lost in past ages through our hunting by wasteful and excessive means for that dinner table. The question pales before that of species lost due to habitat degradation, part through our shoddy indifference to this earth on which we live, though part, a more modest part, through the direct pressures of our expanding human population. I could make a list of lost animal species, but making a list of plants might be a more pointed thing. Farming is, from the perspective of our species, good, wonderful, and delightful. In an existence of hunter-gatherers, we might have time to sit around and write wonderful poems, but we would exist in a world of alternating hunger and plenty. We would die of accidental poisonings and curable disease. We would never have generated the population required to support the best of ourselves. We would have no wonderful images created by the Webb telescope, though we also would have been spared the worst. So much already accounted and discussed. So yes, farming is good. Mechanized farming that reduces the portion of a population that must be directly involved in producing food is good. The kind of agricultural system that supports our cities is good, but there is a but. Intensive or widespread farming inherently intrudes on natural biodiversity, forcing a range of non-useful plants into smaller and smaller bits of land. Resources are seized, irrigation for example, from the wild world and channeled into crop production. Poisons kill off natural species, while other poisons, aimed at animal pests, damage the natural balance. Our selective breeding practices reduce biodiversity, while our artificial practices of enhancing fertility sometimes have poisonous environmental effects of their own. Modern genetic studies have enhanced selective reproduction with techniques for direct genetic modification of plants, GMO technology. Some people spout vigorous opposition to GMO technology and refuse to eat GMO plants because of health fears. I find that a bit silly. If I'm foolish enough to eat anything from our profits or bust food industry, I am. I have no fondness for subsistence farming or starving. I have no reason to more greatly fear a product marked GMO developed. However, I am opposed to much of big agriculture's work with GMOs, just as I oppose many of their priorities. Much work with plant engineering creates better species for very limited environmental conditions, the artificial ones imposed by agricultural entities. They modify plants, referring to all and sundry means of modification, not GMO technology alone, in fashions that make farmers dependent on the big entities for food and for special fertilizers and herbicides. They engineer genetic accidents out of existence, eliminating the fortunate mutation. They actively work to reduce natural biodiversity. Such directions are short-sighted. They are exploitive to the farmers, those farmers who are not mere corporate entities. They reduce the potential accommodation to changing environmental conditions. They impoverish the planet. They also give me tomatoes that taste like cardboard and strawberries that taste like the pithy green of tomato vines. Is it unethical to reduce the quality of life for ourselves and other species? I say yes. And, of course, it is quite unethical to contribute wantonly to the great extinction we seem to be inevitably causing. Being humans, we are not bound by our biology. We have within ourselves the capacity to reason, thereby to make both pragmatic and ethical judgments. Ethically, as well as pragmatically, we have duties to our children. Ethically, I submit, we have duties to the planet which nurtures us. We are, I would claim, morally obligated to behave in a responsible fashion. Our treatment of our fellow species, creatures we are driving into extinction, demands it. Our treatment of the planet, which we may be making less habitable for all life forms, demands it. Our offspring and their futures, that we treat our children, our grandchildren, and generations not yet conceived as worthy of life, freedom, and dignity, demands it. Our treatment of all humans presently alive on this planet likewise demands our action, as we threaten to expose all to the erratic climate of an Earth in abrupt physical transition, as well as the pains of potentially lethal overpopulation. Are the changes we are making to the planet ethical? Some are the changes any species makes to its environment, greater perhaps by measure, not by kind. As such, unless they destroy the planet, which many, by their excess of breadth, do, they are the stuff of pragmatic concerns rather than ethical ones. However, we also follow paths of willful destruction. We suffer environmental hubris, and we act without concern as to the consequences. In each of these regards, our ethical behavior is lacking. Efforts designed to reduce the mix of wilderness and unkempt garden of this earth to a controlled, monocultured farm are unethical. Species diversity, regarding both wild things and products of our agricultural existence, is good. Monoculturing reduces this very big planet. Our popular contemporary agricultural practices tend strongly to the destructive. Some, by nature of their extent, are fully evil.